The number one cause of bankruptcy in the United States is healthcare. Tens of millions don't have insurance, and those that do still don't get the coverage they need. I'm flashing back to April of 2023 in a previous podcast where I joined Dr. Ricardo Nuila in his home. He was gracious enough to invite me into his space so he can share his thoughts on how we can improve a system that's been broken since the nation's founding, what areas of American healthcare are in the worst shape, and his book, The People's Hospital, Hope and Peril in American Medicine. Now available wherever you get your books.
Hi, I'm Ed Sheeran. This is Bruno Mars.
Hey, it's Katy Perry.
This is your man Flo Rida with Freddie Cruz.
This is AJ Mitchell with Freddie Cruz.
Freddie Cruz.
Freddie Cruz.
Let you go pick Mr. 305 and you already know what it is.
My name is Freddie, and it's time to cruise through HTX. Talk to me about growing up in Wichita.
Wichita. Well, I grew up there until I was around in second grade, actually. We moved when I was in second grade. I don't remember much of it other than there was not a big community of Hispanics there, you know? It was just like this little enclave of people that we saw every week, you know? We had great friends that were there and ended up moving to Houston also. So it just seemed like that was the trend at the time, like people leaving that part of the country and coming to Houston.
It's easy when you grow up with your clique, with your bubble, with your circle, and you think, yeah, well, you know, we're in Texas, and what's the first thing you think of when you think of Texas? And that's true, but then it's also really not true when you zoom out and look at how diverse and how there are all these different cultures, but you quite literally grew up as someone that was not like the rest of everybody else.
Right.
And then on top of that, you grew up in a family where there were not very, very many people doing what your family was known for doing. I mean, you come from a family of doctors. Right.
Exactly. Yeah, you don't realize that. And somehow, even in my family, it was hidden just because my dad never liked to think that we were different than anybody, you know, and it took me many years to be like, well, people might have perceived you as differently, you know, but I think my dad grew up very proud of being a doctor. I grew up with the idea that I'm in a family of doctors. I don't think that they ever put much pressure on me to say, you must be a doctor, but it was just this model out there. And it just felt like I was going to slip into that. And I mean, it required a lot of work and thought and dedication, but it was one of those situations where I felt like, okay, this is my path and I need to become a doctor. But once I hit college, I really struggled with that. And I've struggled with it kind of for a decade after that.
It's interesting you have the self-awareness to say that you struggled through it. So when you say would you say it was more academically, like grades? Was it society, culture-wise, like, oh my gosh, I've got this freedom. I'm hanging out with all these college kids and they're crazy? Or was it a mixture of the two or something not related?
It was a little bit of like all of the above and some other things. It was also that medicine started to look kind of not like an appealing profession to me. And I kind of reckon with that in the book, where it's just, I started to see my dad was laboring against insurance companies, you know, the pride that he had started to sort of diminish during those years where I was like really applying. But also I fell in love with books. I fell in love with writing, and I got to a point where I desperately wanted to write. And I mean, I just was, it became in my mind, like, if you don't do this, you've sold out. And, you know, at that time, you know, Gen X is like all about selling, you know, not selling out. And so, you know, like I think Reality Bites was on at the time, you know, all these kind of like, you know, thoughts about like, you can't sell out. And to me, it became like, truly it became, if you go into medicine, you're selling out.
Oh man.
I know, it was weird. But the alternative was that like I became an English major because I did not like my biology major, and I was like, I'm just going to stay on the path to get into medical school, and I went into English major, and I loved my classes. I mean, I pushed it. I went into writing classes. I took a class in script writing and dialogue, and by the time I had gone through all the hoops to get into medical school. I got into my dream school here in Houston, Baylor, because it was the cheapest school in the United States. It was a great school, but it's also cheap. And I was like, man, I don't think that I can go to medical school because I'll sell out if I'm not going to be a writer if I go into medicine. So I go to my script writing professor and I tell him, I think I'm going to leave my medical school admission because I want to be a writer. I was totally expecting him to say like, great, go forth, go watch some Woody Allen movies and you'll find your way. And he was just like, it's like, you'd be crazy not to go to medical school.
Yeah.
And I just was like, oh man, he just thinks I'm a bad writer. There's a chip on my shoulder, you know? He's like, no, you can go to graduate school in writing and learn technique, but where are you going to get your stories from? And that was it's not like that like set me for it, but it stuck with me, those words from then on. And I had to really kind of come to, it was an echo in my mind for the next 3-5 years. Had a lot of twists and turns. I mean, I went to medical school. I took a year off. I went back. I left. I came back. I was always struggling with the idea of like writing versus medicine. I thought that they were so different and that I would sell out if I went into medicine. And then I happened to come to Ben Taub Hospital, which is the teaching hospital of Baylor, and medicine was different. And I saw the stories there. I started to find those stories there. And I mean, I fell in love with the responsibility of medicine. I loved that people would give me their stories and I, in return, would give them the best type of healthcare that I could give, my effort, my attentiveness. And I just didn't want to leave that place. I felt like it was reinforcing, giving me, the ability to write too. I feel like I learned to be a writer also at Ben Taub. So that's what set me off.
It seems like there's a lot of reciprocity when it comes to building the relation. Before we hit record, we're talking about people and building relationships and how you tell that to your students who you teach. But it seems there's a lot of reciprocity when it comes to patients telling you about their journey, their struggles with whatever they're going through, and then you absorbing it, and then you're able to take that information and kind of and then create a story, and then that you go up, because I'm learning things. I learned things reading this book through the stories that you shared with people who shared with you
exactly
what they're going through. The story about Roxana and Steve and all these people, and the writing is beautiful. It's obvious you wanted to be a writer because of the way it's written, and it's obvious you study the craft. And so, there's a lot of reciprocity that goes through that and builds that trust between patient and doctor.
That's essential to me. That the writing is a manifestation of that trust and of that relationship. It's when I just genuinely feel like I am the servant for the patients, and I mean, because they're coming, I imagine that they're having a terrible day. They're sick. They don't know what's going on because it's such a complex system. And it's just like, if I can make them happy and content that day, I've done my job. And so that's the foundation of that trust. And it's just a very privileged position to be in, because I can just listen to their problems, help solve their problems. And if I can communicate that back to them, then it becomes like that relationship is solidified, and then there comes times where I'm like, I'm thinking at a different level in terms of like, well, your story resonated with me. Maybe it would resonate with everybody, because I don't know if the American public knows this, I don't know if people around, and that's sort of the writer part of me comes out, where it's just where I want to depict that.
You've written short stories, you've won awards, so obviously you are steeped into this world. How much of your life in medicine has impacted the writing and vice versa?
A lot. I think that it's hard to imagine myself as a writer without the medicine. and vice versa. It's hard to imagine myself as a doctor without the writing right now. To me, it's become one thing now. And I genuinely feel when I am on the wards, working with patients, I feel like I'm working on my writing. I'm attuned to the drama of their stories. I'm looking at details that it's worlds that I just don't know. And I'm looking, investigating that, and I'm situating those in my mind into like greater arcs and greater narratives about things. You know, they're like specks in like a big painting for me. But also, you know, it's the other way around. And when I'm writing, I feel like I'm working, I'm improving how I'm a doctor, you know, because I'm focusing on my words. I'm focusing on the expression of those. When you read and when you write, you are thinking about a reader and you are trying to hit notes with that person the way that I want to hit notes with patients. The way that you say something can just tinge the way that a patient in that vulnerable situation understands it. And so to me, it's taken a long time, but it's like they've come together. So, I mean, one of my inspirations is Anton Chekhov, who was a doctor. What I love about his work is that you don't see medicine in his work, you know? I mean, I feel, you know, jealous of that because I almost feel like I have to write about medicine so often. I almost feel like it's like, part of it is because it's like low-hanging fruit insofar as like, that's what I'm seeing right there. And it is so dramatic and it's so much on people's mind. You know, everybody has some healthcare story, some story of sickness. We get into our fears through healthcare. So it's like it's gold mine for writers.
And you write what you know.
And you write what you know.
Yeah.
And you write what you know. And I believe that too, you know, but I love that Chekhov can just write about people and situations, and it's not medical situations, you know? So I almost like I'm thinking, you know, maybe the next step is like trying to do something like that, you know?
Or maybe fiction.
Yeah, no, I love.
You know?
I started off with short fiction, and I do want to. I still is like a very big goal to write a novel. You know, like there's doctor authors who have done both. You know, right now I'm reading Abraham Verghese's work, and he's written these large novels, these epic novels, and you can see the medicine like right there with him, and it's interesting. Medicine gives you a lot of gifts for storytelling. You know, so.
Yeah, and I've got a buddy up in Oregon, Tyler Jones, who writes horror, and he works in a cardio unit. And
interesting.
And he's talked about seeing stories or seeing individuals who are on every end of the human spectrum. So you've got a little boy who's got a heart problem, then you've got a 70-something-year-old boy, and we've talked on more than one occasion on my podcast. And we've talked a lot about just the human condition and what makes a life and what makes a good life and what makes a hero, what makes a villain, and just the complexity of just being a person and just being alive.
Yeah, you know, you said horror and horror story in the unit. One of the first horror stories I would say is Anton Chekhov's Ward Number 6, where it's a doctor caring for a psychiatric unit in Russia in like the late 1800s. And I mean, spoiler alert, he ends up being in the psychiatric unit because of the bureaucratic and Byzantine system that they have and everything. And but you do see like all of what you're talking about with Tyler and everything. It's just these glimpses of how human beings behave, not just as individuals, but collectively, how they can behave differently collectively and how it can like turn on ideas. And it's really just, check that. Everybody should check out that story in Ward Number 6.
Absolutely. And going back to when you were an intern, and something you said that really resonated with me. It's okay if you die. And I'd like to know how those words affect you and the decisions you and your patients make together. And then when you break out and they make their decisions with their families, so on and so forth.
Yeah. You know, I was an intern and I had a patient who, I mean, I'm saying this with all the utmost respect, but this is how I felt. He had been through the ringer. You know, he had just been, he had metastatic cancer that had affected his body so much that he was in and out of the hospital, in and out of the ICU, and he was tired. He was really just exhausted, and he spoke Spanish, and I was an intern, meaning like I had just graduated from medical school, and at that moment, you don't feel like you know anything. You know more than you think you know, but you don't feel like you know much. And not only that, I had taken a year to try to write, so I was like, felt like I was very behind. But, you know, I was also able to work as a doctor, write orders and everything. I was just very guarded. And, but his story of this, just, I could hear it in the tone of his voice. I could see it in the chart. He was exhausted, and I sat with him, and he told me about, you know, everything that he'd been through, and it just came out of my mouth. I was just like, you know, it's okay if you die. I felt this resistance, you know, I felt this resistance to him of just like, he was talking about his daughter, about how he knew he was a burden to his daughter. His daughter was working, you know, like people are like trying to hang on, you know, and he could recognize that, man, I am like, you know, my illness, which will not be cured, is hanging over this family right now. And I could hear it in the tone of his voice, and it just escaped my lips. And I just think about that because I told him it's okay if you die. And that generated a conversation about how he didn't want to have resuscitation. He didn't want to be resuscitated or intubated if his heart stopped or if he stopped breathing. I filled out the chart, and I left his bedside, and lo and behold, 10 minutes later, I get a call from the nurse that he's died. And it is one of those mysteries of the universe, of medicine, that I still don't know how to reconcile. I don't know how to like wrap my head around that exactly. Is that, did he release? Did those hearing that kind of like allow him to just say, I can just sort of, you know, allow my body to die? Was it coincidental? I don't know the answer to that. I just know that we don't know everything. You know, we don't know everything in science. And I think a lot of doctors, if you're tuned into your patients, you'll find these moments, and it stuck with me.
Yeah, that was a powerful story. And, you know, it goes back to the overall stereotype that we all just want to help.
Yeah.
And that's why a lot of people get into medicine, because they want to help. They want to make the world a better place. And and here you have a man who's quite literally helpless. His name is Alvaro. He's in the book, and the book is The People's Hospital. And the way you describe his condition and then leading up to that moment was just painful. But, you know, he feels that he's a burden.
Yeah.
Yet at the same time, you know, he knows that his death is not going to be something easy to cope with. He's a father and a grandfather, but at the same time, his daughter is going through hell trying to make sure that he's taken care of. So it's like you're going to help either way, but either way is going to be painful.
Right. Yeah. It's complex.
Yeah.
The complexity is, and that's where I feel that there's no right answers often. There's just choices a lot of times. And I feel like what this particular person had not sort of heard is that viewpoint was that it's okay if you die. You know, it's like you don't have to necessarily hold on. That's how life goes. Life moves on, you know, and I'm not trying to say that disrespectfully. I just wanted to put that out there as one of those things that you could consider if it helps you alleviate your suffering.
Absolutely. And shifting, because in the book you do write about these individuals and their struggles and their journeys going through all these different conditions. You've got a transplant patient, you got another cancer patient who you write about, and there's one in particular that really bothered me, and that's the boy who was essentially dumped at a hospital because he was uninsured. He had a note attached to him, and he died of meningitis. And so how frequent does this happen?
Yeah, I mean, so it happened much more frequently in the 1980s, and that's one of the reasons why we have the law now. It's become a right. We have the law EMTALA, which is the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act, that was enacted because there was a whole literature out in the medical journals about this patient dumping. Patient dumping was basically patients who were uninsured coming to hospitals where the hospitals decided to dump them onto the public hospitals. And when I say dump, it means like they would just send them with a note, or they would drive them themselves. Like, it would just be like there were all these, nefarious ways by which the patients were sent to other places. And so Texas, out of all places, I mean, I love my state, but I also recognize that it's a complex state, just like, it's like a human being, it's like complex, right?
Yeah.
Texas, for its reputation of a lot of things, it took the first stand in saying, like, passing anti-dumping laws. You can't dump patients in these critical moments, because there was patients like this who he was in a life or death situation, and he was sent away within the throes of that life and death situation, and he ended up dying, and that was written about in one of the medical journals. And so they passed this law, and now there's a form of that patient dumping, but it's not as egregious as it was because there's regulations about that law.
And the fact that it's called patient dumping, it just it's inhumane.
Yeah.
That people were just being treated like animals, dumped like animals. And
yeah, I think it's a manifestation of like the history of the healthcare system, which is that we just have not in this country forged a healthcare system that says we're going to provide this level of coverage for these situations for everybody. Now, some people might argue, EMTALA is saying that it's like, okay, you're in an emergency, we take care of you. It's true. Yeah. People have a right to get emergency treatment in this country to stabilize emergencies, even if you're not a citizen, even if you're not insured. But it's still, the nuances of that are that there's chronic care, there's different ways to access healthcare, and we just have not had in this country a reckoning with the idea that, everybody should have basic universal healthcare. And I think that that's why we have things like dumping. We have manifestations of that problem as being dumping law, and we have to pass anti-dumping laws because we just haven't said we're going to make a system. Everything that is about healthcare is patchwork. It's just like it was moving like this, and like it's not working, and somebody's being affected. So let's just try to adjust this, adjust this, tweak this and that. But it's not really saying we need a system.
Yeah, and this you're talking about was back in the 80s, but in reading the book and then seeing one of your Instagram videos that this actually started around the time of the American Revolution. Yeah. Then we tried to fix it in Civil War era. Then Teddy tried to fix it. Then FDR did some stuff, and then LBJ did some stuff. So, I mean, this isn't like all of a sudden we just end up with a really crappy healthcare system. This is
an ongoing
centuries
debate.
In the making.
This is an ongoing thorn in our side. Thorn that is like cuts to the core of who we are as Americans, right? This is from the Revolutionary War. We decided that there would be no cap on doctors' fees. And the reason that's important is that we've just basically allowed doctors to charge what they want for their fees. That's different than other countries, okay? And what that has engendered is this fee for service that we have. This is the fundament of the American healthcare system, which is that, and this is something that President Nixon in the 70s called the illogical incentive of the American healthcare system, which is that you can bill more in finding more sickness. So we're basically paying to treat sickness rather than to make people healthy.
Chris Rock was right.
Chris Rock was right. Exactly. Exactly. And that's what, and that's why our system is very different from other countries is because we incentivize that, the treatment of illness. You know, if you do more, you can bill more as a doctor. But what's happened is also that in these debates that we've had in the 1900s, you know, there was like the 1910s, the thought, well, maybe we should get healthcare is becoming expensive. We should give it for everybody so that it's cheaper for everybody. Lobbies have really come and said, no, you don't want that. We don't want socialized healthcare. This can has been kicked down the road. We ended up having this pegging health insurance to work, you know, employment. This is how we experience health insurance for the most part. That was not like a grand plan. That was in 1945. What that was that to combat inflation, you know, companies wanted to hire employees, and but there was the problem of inflation, and so they couldn't offer them higher wages because the government had said nobody can offer higher wages because we're trying to combat inflation. So they allowed companies to offer health insurance plans.
Yeah,
and so that was another manifestation of that patchwork where it's like, well, we can't figure out healthcare, you know, like healthcare is like a real hot potato politically. And there's a lot of interests who really want to keep it as it is because it's generating a lot of money. So it's just like, let's just put it on the employers. But what we found today is that it's so expensive, you know, and I mean, employers don't want to pay for as much. So they cut the plans. People are left paying a lot out of pocket. It's just obscene amounts of money now.
Yeah, and it's you're obviously way more knowledgeable with this stuff than I am. I don't know what to think, and I read so in the book you talk about you and your father and your relationship, and you have different because when you talk about policy, it's always going to get political, and this isn't a political conversation. All that to say is that I agree with both of you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
When you make a solid case for how you see things, and I'm like, hell yes, that. And then you talk about your father, and I'm like, hell yes, that.
Yeah.
And so, does the system need to be, metaphorically speaking, obviously blown up, and then we just start all over, like, you know, Reconstruction with the Civil War, you just start all over, blown up? Or is there a sort of managed collapse that we could do to where we, you know, start to dismantle the machine to a certain extent, and then we just build it back up the way we can? Or are we just far too divided? There are too many interests. There's too much whatever. That's
one of the reasons why I wrote in an op-ed piece recently that I think we need to have a national referendum on this topic where everybody votes yay or nay on a basic healthcare for all system. The reason is because that's my concern is that this gets so tinged at there's a lot of agreement that healthcare is broken. In fact, there's been a survey of Texans. 7 out of 10 Texans believe that the federal government has or should provide universal basic health care for people. So the majority of Americans across the political spectrum think that we need to do something about healthcare.
Yeah.
More than half of 60% of Americans almost grade the American healthcare as a total failure. So everybody's aware of this. The problem is that our democratic system makes it so that if a candidate brings it up, it's just politicized, and we cannot. It's hard for one side to stomach another candidate bringing up a proposal. So that's why when one of my thoughts is, why don't we can have a non-binding referendum? We've never had a national referendum, but I believe that this is one of the most important topics that we have faced as a nation and will continue to face because of the amount of money we're spending on it and what it's doing to us, you know, health-wise. But if we had a national referendum where people are like, it's not a political issue, it's just yay or nay, you know, and then that would send a message to Congress to say, build us a healthcare system. And then, you know, it's going to take a lot of negotiation, but the politics of it, there's good ideas on both sides. I mean, I think the way I saw this book when I was writing it was like that I did not write this book to preach to the choir. In fact, this book started off as like, I'm writing patient stories.
Yeah.
And I had to really kind of like come and extract ideas from the patient stories kind of to make it sense. I didn't start off with an idea and say, okay, now let's look at like people and like, let me, prove my idea with people. No, it was the opposite. And so I think that step forward is to acknowledge the ideas on both sides. And for me, it's that on one political side is the idea that we have to cut costs. And I totally agree with that. Money is the problem in healthcare in America. And I think that that's a legitimate and we can, we need to take that seriously. On the other side, I think politically is that everybody should get healthcare, and I think that that's also true. What I think is so interesting, where I found myself, was that I worked in Houston, Texas, at a public healthcare system that achieved both. And I was just like, wow, okay,
yes.
This is the reason why I want to write this book,
right?
Is to show people that we can accomplish those two major things if we think about healthcare differently than we are thinking about it right now.
Yes. And to your point, Ben Taub has the reputation, and you write about it in the book.
Yeah.
And it's almost like you wrote something that everybody says is their first opinion. It's where I'd want to go if I got shot.
Yeah, exactly. People in Houston, we all know that, right? It's like where I'd go, and like what's interesting is that like I feel like when I was in high school here in like the 90s and stuff like that, it really was like that's where I'd get if I got shot. But it was like literally like I'm not the type of person who probably gets shot. Now, people have recognized the trauma capacities of this hospital.
And I saw that firsthand, man. My grandmother, God rest her soul, she in her early 70s was hit by a truck.
Oh my gosh.
And she was taken to Ben Taub. And she survived. A year later, it was as if nothing happened. And she lived more than 10 years afterward.
Amazing. I mean,
thanks to that kind of help, treatment. That's
the type of benefit to everybody in the community that a hospital like that gives.
Yeah.
One of the reasons I wanted to write this book, I felt compelled to write this book, was to dispel that notion that this is a public hospital for people who homeless, can't afford. I mean,
for those people,
people, it's for all of us because. You know what? As society becomes more as people are going faster down the highways and everything like that, we're going to be more subject to those risks, you know? And we need to have, Ben Taub is one of 2 level 1 trauma centers in Houston. Now, the recommendation is that you have a level 1 trauma center for every 1 million people in the metropolitan area.
Okay.
So it's doing the work of 3 or 4 because we have like 7 million people in the metropolitan area. And they happen to be, those 2 level 1s happen to be right across the street from each other. Right. So I think that just on the basis of like what it can offer all of us, there are, the trauma burn units. Those are things that all of us are going to, that's a safety net for all of us because we might get into accidents. We might get errantly shot even, so.
Yeah. It's something, something you wrote about in the book. And I love this analogy. It's that the hospital is a body and the departments are the organs. And so I'd like to know which metaphorical organ is in the best health and which organ is in the worst health as a result of the current state of healthcare in America.
Wow, that's a good. I think that at Ben Taub, at least the muscles is what I describe as like the wards, I believe, which is that they are just like you're doing the work of like churning things out, movement, and I feel like that the wards are, unfortunately, the hospital is so much at the whim of unemployment in this city, so it's like, remember, in America, we've pegged health insurance to employment. So if like people get laid off, we see a lot more patients in our hospital because they were getting treatment. A subset of people are getting treatment for, cancers or for their diabetes. And all of a sudden the rug has been pulled out from underneath them. So they end up in the hospital. They're in the emergency room. Our emergency room is almost always packed. Now, we have a good way of triaging people. And I think that, I know I noted in the book, the wait lists, the wait times are almost legendary, but I think that that's more of a sign of our society. Like I said, it's doing the work of like a trauma of like 3 or 4 trauma centers rather than like the operations in the hospital. But I think that if you look at the statistics, people, when they get up to the floors, they actually really like their experience up there.
Yeah.
So I think that that's where like, that's the organ, the muscles, which are moving, people, churning people through, getting movement. I think that's what's performing the best, And
what about the worst? Oh gosh.
Well, I think that, this is tough because it's just also a, I think that it's hard to say this, but I think emergencies, like I said, I think emergency room is doing the best that it can do, but we have to recognize that like Chris Rock is right again. There's our emergency rooms are also filled with people who get paper cuts, and like that right that I told you about, the Emergency Medical Treatment and Labor Act. One of the flip sides of that is that people go to the emergency rooms when maybe they don't have to,
Yeah.
And so that's again another sort of societal thing that we need to deal with. We would rather go to emergency rooms than to primary care doctors. And I feel like that's something that we need to reconcile in this country. What if we had a system where you could just say, hey, I have a problem. I'm going to go to this clinic down the street. And, I'm sure that I'm going to be seen at that moment. I don't have to wait 3 months ahead of time. I don't have to worry about my insurance. I can just, that's how it is in a lot of in other countries, and that's one of the reasons why I say emergency is because it's like all of us are in that together.
Yeah. And there's something in the book, algorithmania.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's people sending doctors, medical professionals sending others with paper cuts or whatever.
Yeah.
They don't need to go to a place like Ben.
No, that's true. That's true. That does happen in medicine. And that's where algorithmania to me is, I define it as adherence to an algorithm, even when it just doesn't make any sense, right? When it means that you haven't listened to the patient or to the person, and it's a part of medicine. It can be a part of medicine that, in just trying to stick to that algorithm and just being like, if this, do this, okay, checkbox, boom, send them to this other place, that we just lose sight of the whole forest, for the trees. We just have missed the chief complaint. We've missed the problem, and I think that is one of the reasons why people do get referred. I mean, yeah, sometimes I will come across patients in the emergency room and I'm like, why did you come here? And they were like, I called a number and they sent me here. And I'm like, okay,
yeah,
that's a tough situation. I can't fault anybody for calling a number and them. So we have to reckon with that. And I mean, some of that is liability concerns, but some of that is just like, again, that algorithmania of just being like, it's an easy fix just to like send somebody to like the emergency room rather than to like kind of think through that problem.
What are your thoughts on AI in medicine?
I think that it probably does have a role in certain parts of medicine. Like I can see the distinguishing, for instance, in pathology or in radiology, where it's about like distinguishing visually like some images, I could see how AI could be probably helpful for some of that. But I do fear, like, I read what was it? The Chat GPT, the New York Times one where he was like the AI was telling the New York Times reporter that he loved, it just became like kind of like a creepy kind of like interaction.
Oh, that he wants to rule the world or something? I saw a headline.
It was
like
it
that.
was. I mean, people should read that because it was really interesting. But I fear that AI will, in trying to put a human touch on medicine, it's going to kind of like backfire. And really, I mean, I think that what people want is just the trust that somebody is trying to do a really good job for them. Now, I think that we need to have standards, obviously. No matter how good how kind somebody is at the bedside, they have to be able to diagnose well, treat well, and everything. So I'm not trying to diminish that, but I think that there is something about a human being listening, understanding, and forging ahead with a plan that resonates with people. And I think that AI can make that less of a priority, and I'm worried about that. Yeah,
and it goes back to relationships.
Yeah.
Always goes back to, and AI will, well, depending on who you listen to, they can replace relationships. No. But I don't think, I mean, if AI was invented by a human, and that human had and has relationships. And so that's something that it'll never be able to take away from you, from me, from society, from anybody on the planet.
And the other thing is that AI was invented by a human being who programmed it, and that human being has his or her own, biases when they make that. That's one of the things that I discovered in my research is that, there have been moments where in medicine where people had great intentions on how to design programs to help people get healthcare. But in the unrolling of those programs, rolling out of those programs, we discovered huge biases, and so that's why, I think that if we yield ourselves to AI decision making, we're going to see a lot of those biases come out more often.
It's going to be a big learning curve for us to figure out exactly what the right recipe is to, if human life and preservation of our humanity is the dinner, the grand feast, then humans are one ingredient and then AI is the other ingredient. So now we have to figure out what's the right amount.
Right. I agree with that. I think I think it'd be naive to say we should just get rid of AI because that's just like where
our enemy is going to get it.
we need to just harness it and recognize it as a tool and limit how that tool is utilized in essential human moments. Human moments should still be human moments. But it should if that human being wants to have the tool to help that moment, that's fine, but it's like, it shouldn't replace those moments.
Y'all get the book, The People's Hospital, Hope and Peril in American Medicine by Dr. Ricardo Nuila. And I'd like to wrap up the interview with something from the book. People are scared to help an illegal because they think it's illegal to help an illegal. And that was another quote that just really, really struck a chord with me.
Yeah, that was said to me by a very good person who was trying to help one of the subjects or people in the book. You could hear in her words, right, the conflict, right? She's just like, and Ben Taub serves everybody, and we see people who are undocumented, and I come across their stories, and I just feel very privileged, and I feel like I'm lucky to be a doctor. And the type of practice that I want to conduct is that, like, whoever comes in the door, I listen to them and I try to help them out. And I think that that's the model that we should have for American healthcare.
Doctor, thank you for inviting me to your home to talk to you.
It's great to have you here. I loved seeing this equipment. This is great.
It's a lot of fun. Y'all grab the book. Again, The People's Hospital, Hope and Peril in American Medicine. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Freddie.
Hey, it's me. I'm back with a quick little nudge. If you enjoyed this podcast as much as I did putting it together for you, then please leave a review on your favorite podcast platform and subscribe to the newsletter at cruisethroughhtx.com and share with your family and friends. Thank you.